Hi, welcome to Every Child Belongs. I'm thrilled to have Lexi Rape with us today. Lexi started I guess, Lexi, would you call it's a business, The Adapted Way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can find her on Instagram. Her website is theadaptedway.com. And I'm going to use this description. You have it on your website, and I think it's perfect. It says, "My name's Lexi, and I'm a special education teacher on a mission to help churches overcome the behavioral and instructional barriers that keep kids with disabilities from accessing their children's ministry programs. If you love Jesus and have a heart for kids with disabilities, let's be friends." And I read that, and I'm like, somebody had actually told me about you. And I read
Oh,
that, and I thought,
nice.
oh, yes, I want to be friends with you. And also, what you do, you're a special education teacher, and
Yes.
you use what you have learned in the classroom. And I know when we
Mm-hmm.
had talked before, you said your education was great and you learned a ton, but actually working with and engaging kids, you learn in the classroom, you said, oh, I can help churches do this too, because what's more important than helping a kid know who Jesus is? So,
Definitely.
tell, Lexi, tell us more about who you are.
Sure. So, like you said, I'm a special education teacher. This is actually my third year teaching. I've always done special ed pre-K. That's kind of where my heart is. That's where I feel like I know the most about. And so, yeah, this is my third year doing that. I also lead a disability ministry. So I've been involved in a ministry called Young Life for about the past 7 years. I actually started out just leading their traditional Young Life ministry, which is for typical high schoolers. But then after a couple experiences in the school system, I actually decided to switch over to their disability ministry called Capernaum. So I've been doing that for about the past 4 or 5 years, and I just love it.
Do you mind telling us, like, what were the things that made you decide to switch?
Sure. So it's kind of a long story, and I know you've already heard part of it. But so when I started college, I went to community college, and my degree was elementary education. So I was just taking gen ed courses at that point. And my intention was to transition to a 4 year university after my first 2 years at community college, but I missed the deadlines to apply. So I was like, all right, scratch that. I have to take a gap year. And I wanted to get my feet like wet in special education because I was like kind of on the fence. I didn't wasn't really sure if I wanted to teach special ed just because I had no experience in it. And so I actually ended up working at a public separate day school for my gap year. And it's a school for students with multiple disabilities. So like they can't go to their regular public school either because of medical needs, physical needs, and things like that. Um, and so, just backtracking, for those first 2 years of college, I was leading the traditional ministry of Young Life. But then, after my year of working at this school, I feel like my perspective totally changed on like who I want to serve and just like the sense of urgency that there is working and sharing the gospel with students with disabilities. At this school, I worked with children that had disabilities that I had never even like known existed or was exposed to in my life. And not to sound like a downer, but like at schools like these, there typically are 1 to 2 deaths a year. So like I feel like that just like is really what ignited the spark. Like my kids were only in pre-K when I was an assistant there, but I was like I couldn't wait until they were in high school. Like if I just happened to be in the same area leading Capernaum, like when they were like further along, I was just like
Right.
so excited to like get them involved. Um, I moved, so I'm no longer in that area. But like that whole time, I was like, man, I really wish that there were opportunities for churches to learn how to teach students like these about Jesus. But at that point, I hadn't really like started anything yet because like I'd never taken special ed courses. I feel like I didn't really like know how to teach churches like how to like reach kids like these because like I was learning myself. So then after that, I after that year, I transitioned to leading Capernaum, which is for high schoolers. But then the adapted way was really born. Like once I became a full-time teacher and learned the ropes of like how to accommodate students with more intense needs and disabilities. And yeah, that's how I got to where I am today.
Yeah, I love your story. And you said you've just been teaching 3 years, but I just want you to know from interacting with you, from using the tools that you provide, your experiences feel much more beyond 3 years. Of course, you have been working with kids and students with disabilities for much longer than 3 years. So, Lexi, you say on your website that you want to be our behavior bestie, which I think indicates that for kids who have differences or disabilities, you're maybe seeing behaviors that may be challenging. So, Lexi, why do you want to be our behavior bestie?
Definitely. So, a lot of the times, and working with churches, the main pattern that I'm finding is that when it comes to including kids with disabilities in their programs, it's not that they don't want to. And that's why, like, kids aren't coming and families can't bring their children. A lot of the times, it's just they don't know where to start and don't know what to do. I tell people this all the time. I have my bachelor's degree in special education, and I learned nothing about behavior in my 4 years of schooling. I actually learned everything from the paraprofessional that I had in my classroom my first 2 years. And a para is just a fancy word of saying like my lead assistant. And so I had this amazing assistant. Her name was Robin. She had about 10 years of experience under her belt. And she would just like coach me through every single scenario. And I really don't think I would have survived my first year teaching without Robin. And I tell her that all the time. But so then just transferring that to churches, there are a lot of well-intentioned churches who just, they really don't know what to do. Either
Right.
like they tell parents, I'm sorry, we can't accommodate your child in ministry, or a child has a meltdown in the middle of ministry and the parents are having to be called out of the service. And so, yeah, my intention with teaching churches, like about managing challenging behaviors and giving them resources, is first of all to just help get kids in the door, because if you can't get them in the door, that's the first problem. They need to be able to, be in the Sunday school classroom with everybody, or at least be in some type of setting where they're accessible for learning. And then it's also just to serve parents. You don't want a parent to have to sit with their child for the whole entire length of Sunday school and not be able to go to the actual service. And so it's serving both kids and parents. And managing behaviors, I feel like people see it as like this big, scary, daunting thing. But once you have the tools and resources, really, it's not as scary as people think. It's all about just like breaks, giving students an opportunity to communicate, including their preferred interests in the classroom, building relationships with them. And yeah, I feel like once people have the tools that they need, they can do a lot more with kids. And then it's so much easier to share the gospel with a student who's regulated and actually enjoys being in the classroom.
Right. So many good points there. You said include their preferred, you said including their preferences. And I know
Yes.
that for some churches, it's, hey, no outside toys. We'll do with what. So tell me, what does that mean? You include their preferences.
Yes. So something that we do in my classroom, it's called pairing. And you could pair for like a whole variety of reasons. Pairing is basically you're pairing something preferred with something non-preferred. So like if you have a student who you can't even get to come into your Sunday school classroom, something that I do in my classroom at school is I get like a toy that I know is highly preferred for a lot of kids, whether that's like a toy shark, a toy train, silly putty Play-Doh. I bring it to the door. Boom. All of a sudden they see this is a place where I can have fun. I really want that Play-Doh. That Play-Doh is a lot more fun than the hallway that I'm standing and screaming in right now. I'm going to go in and I'm going to play Play-Doh. Obviously it's going to be like a different preference for each child, but like in the beginning of the school year at school, or like when a new student first comes to your ministry, I'm sure a lot of kid ministry leaders can think of like things that a lot of kids just enjoy no matter who they are. So just like having a bag of those things available, like that you can quickly access near the door to show to a child.
Great idea.
And so, yeah, the thing about like not wanting outside toys, sometimes, a kid just needs that comfort toy. If it's a new place that they're coming for the very first time, imagine you have no language, no way to communicate. Your parents are dropping you off with all of these strange people in a place that you've never been before. It might be louder than you're used to. It might be bright. Having that like comfort toy from home like after the kid gets used to being in your classroom for like a year, sure, fade that out. But like if you can't get someone even in the room and you're having them with a toy inside the room is better than not having them in the room at all, is what I say.
Yes.
And yeah, so a lot of the things with like the preferred toys, we use them as like getting kids in the room, using them as transition objects. So like first this, then you get this. Um, like first sit at the carpet, then you get to hold your toy car or something like that, or even as like reinforcers. So I promise you, it's powerful. It's like magic. I have students who have struggled so much to transition, and then all of a sudden you bring out a transition toy, and it's like no tantrum, no crying. Like I promise, it's like magic.
Oh, I believe you.
Yeah.
I have never considered having a bucket of those items right by the door.
Yeah. And I will say, so there is the argument where people are like, oh, well, you're just bribing them. It's it's a bribe if they're already engaged in the problem behavior and you say like, all right, like I'm gonna give you the toy car now to get you to stop crying. It's a reinforcer if you either offer it before the problem behavior happens or if you it's like if a student is like screaming, crying outside the door, I'm not going to just give them Play-Doh while they're still outside because that's just like a bribe to get them to stop crying. But if I say like, oh, if you come in and have a seat and you can have the Play-Doh, you can hold the Play-Doh as you're walking in, then it's a reinforcer because they're doing what our goal was, which is to get them in the room. And even they might still be screaming, crying, but they still are doing what you and the parent wanted them to do. And so then they get the Play-Doh. So there's always the argument with like, is it a bribe or a reinforcer? But if you use it the right way, it's a reinforcer, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yes, that
Yeah.
makes total sense. Yes. And you mentioned Robin, your paraprofessional, as being such
Hmm.
a huge help to you. Well, a lot of churches don't have paraprofessionals. So
Yes.
if they don't have a Robin, what do you think their next step should be so they can be more inclusive?
Yes. So it honestly depends on like where the church is at. Like if they have kids that are coming already that have like needs that need extra attention. So one thing is I would always refer to the parent because they know their child best. They know what can calm their child down and things like that. However, if you're a church who you don't really have any families with kids with disabilities coming yet and you're just looking for a place to get started, I can guarantee there's at least one teacher in your congregation who knows another teacher who teaches special ed or like even like thinking like SLPs, so speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, school
Yes.
psychologists. Like it doesn't just have to be a teacher. Even like people who work in social work, really, you don't just have to think teachers. So I would just start with like, who do you know or who's in your community that you can ask, who's like willing to share things with you. So yeah, I always refer to parents first if you have people already coming, and then just like people with experience in the world of disability.
Okay, one argument I hear to that,
Yes.
because I agree with you, all of those are awesome support. But a ministry leader will say they work with kids all week. I know they aren't going to
Hmm.
want to be in the classroom every Sunday. How can they
Yeah.
possibly help me if they're not in the classroom every Sunday?
Yeah. So to that, I would say like even just having, so I would say they don't have to necessarily be in your classroom to help you. Like, if they're a member of your congregation already, sure, like, ask them if they want to volunteer just like 1 week or like 1 day of their time just to like show you hands on. But they could also just do like a simple 30-minute to an hour training like once a month to help train your volunteers.
Yes.
Um, and honestly, if we're you you might churches might prefer for the person to be a believer. But like there's a lot of people with really good hearts, just like who have a heart of service who may not be believers who are willing to like go in and just teach churches just about the basics of like behaviors and instruction. Um, and so yeah, there's people in your congregation, but then there's also people who are probably willing to help if you're just like really stretched and just like really need to find somebody.
Yes, yes. I totally agree with that. As you've worked with so many different churches and families,
Mhm.
what's the biggest barrier for them attending a church?
I would say a pattern that I've seen again, the biggest barrier is that the churches cannot give the student the behavioral, like, I don't want to say behavioral accessibility. They cannot accommodate the student's behaviors. So like a lot of times, like it's not instruction, like not that this is what you want, but like it's really easy for a kid with a disability who's really well behaved to just sit in the back of the classroom and not really do anything. So like that's not keeping parents from attending church. It's the kids. It's when, I don't want to say it's the kids. No, it's when students have challenging behaviors that the church just doesn't know how to accommodate. So like I've heard from countless families that like their child has been asked to not return to the children's ministry, but then they can't sit in the service for an hour to an hour and a half with their parents. So like I know a lot of parents attend service online if their church is still doing online. Parents being called out to like come sit with their child during ministry. I had a student in my actual pre-K class last year who his mom had to sit with him during Sunday school every single week, and she just never was able to attend service because he was doing the same behaviors that he would do in my classroom. This is a student who had 2-hour tantrums every single day for the first 2 months of school, and he had none for the rest of the year, but only going to church once a week and having your mom sit with you every time, you're not going to make progress that way. So yeah, a lot of times it's behaviors, either parents being asked not to bring their child back or being asked to sit with their child, and which just leads to burnout, both spiritually and emotionally. So
Yeah, and the research backs you up. At least 1 out of 3 families, according to the most recent research, have left a church because their child could not be accommodated.
And it's really sad. I was watching this video from Johnny and Friends.
Yes.
And
Great resource.
I tell this to people all the time. And I haven't been able to find the video since I first watched it. I like don't know what to type in to find it again. But there's a line in the video that says something like this, like parents or families will drive over an hour to get to church and they pass 20 on the way, including yours. And so it just shows that there is such a need. Like, I know there's so many churches who want to do better, who just don't know how. But then you like have those bright spots on the map of churches who really do know what they're doing. And actually, to go back on your one question, what would you tell churches who don't have like people like paraprofessionals? If there's other churches in your community who do know how to accommodate students with disabilities, ask them, because if they have kids who are showing up, obviously they're doing something right and they're successful with it, and they would be more than willing to sit down with you and talk with you. So that's another piece of advice I would give to churches.
How awesome would that be if we acted like the Big C church and we worked together to accommodate kids so they didn't have to bounce around?
Yes.
Great idea. You mentioned the student who had 2-hour tantrums for a couple months and then was doing that in church too. So I would love to, what's the end of that story?
He went from having 2-hour tantrums to like maybe 1 5-minute tantrum once a week. And so I would give his mom like different strategies to use. But I didn't really get that many updates of like how church would go.
So what are some strategies that you gave her?
So I gave her the strategy of using a transition object like we did in school. So like this was a student who we couldn't even get inside of my classroom. She would drop him off at my door. Part of it was like pretty severe separation anxiety, which is like very legitimate. It wasn't just that he didn't want to come to school. And so he was like a very sensory focused kid. So like I would bring like sand and Play-Doh to the door. So like I recommended like her just like bringing a thing of Play-Doh that they could keep at church that the Sunday school leader could then show him as he's like coming in on his way. Another thing that I told her was something that we do at school is like when he comes in and we give him the Play-Doh, we don't place any other demands on him. We wanted it to be like a pretty low demand environment just to like get him used to school. And so like suggesting that like when he goes into the ministry classroom, not being expected to like go and interact with other students right away or like go straight to whatever activity they had out, just giving him time to ease in at his own pace. And then like setting a timer for 5 to 10 minutes and actually explaining to him like when the timer beeps, we're going to put the Play-Doh away, just so he had an idea. And then I think the last suggestion that I gave her is using either a first then or a visual schedule. so that he could see all the steps of Sunday school that he would have to go to until he saw his mom. And I suggested getting a picture of mom to put on like the last step of the visual schedule so he could actually see that he would be
Great.
reunited with his mom after, not that he would be stuck forever in his Sunday school classroom, as some kids feel like they might be.
Right. Visual schedules are so helpful for everybody, even typical kids.
Definitely.
So you're saying, hey, they come in and then you don't put any other demands on them. What would you say to somebody who goes, well, that's not fair. We're putting demands on other kids. Why should we not place the same demands on this child?
So, that's a loaded question. So I'll just start with this. So I hear from a lot of churches like, why, or if I do this for this student, every student is going to want this. Like if I give this one student Play-Doh, everyone's going to want Play-Doh. If I give them a fidget at the carpet, everybody's going to want a fidget. You would be surprised. I teach 3-year-olds and they might be like that for like the first week of school, but after they like realize that like this is what this student needs, they do not ask about it again. And I teach 3-year-olds, so I can guarantee you older students will understand that as well. Just explaining like, this is what this student needs right now, and then like being like, oh, you are doing such a good job sitting all on your own, and things. So just like redirecting. And yeah, with the thing about like why not place demands on him, just you have to think about what your goal is. Is your goal to do everything the same for everybody, or is your goal to meet kids where they're at and fulfill their needs? If we are just treating every single kid the same, whether they're neurodivergent or typical, your class is just going to look like a mess. I'm just being honest. Like, if you want more screaming and tantrums, go ahead and place more demands on the child. But like, you'll learn, I mean, some people learn the hard way, but every kid goes at their own pace, and like these are legitimate accommodations. Like even on like legal IEPs, these are accommodations that teachers have to give students, whether they're in a typical setting or like an inclusive setting or self-contained setting, like on their like special education IEP. So sorry, I feel like I went down another rabbit hole there.
So many leaders, I think, when we talk about goals, I think if they're really to look at their behavior, one of their goals is to make it fair for everybody and have the same expectations for everybody. So you helping us understand that that's not what's best for the kids is really helpful. Definitely. Okay, Lexi, I want to do some rapid fire questions with you. Are you ready?
Okay. Yes.
When were you misunderstood as a child?
Ooh. So this is going to sound really silly, but in preschool, so I never liked milk. I was also very shy as a child, so I didn't like to speak up. But I had a preschool teacher who would not let me drink water until I drank my milk at snack. And I just remember crying every single day during snack time because I really didn't want to drink milk. It like would make me gag. So I never got to drink water, and I would just cry. And I don't even remember if I told my teachers why. They knew that I was crying because I didn't want to drink milk, but I don't think I ever like really spoke up for myself. I think I would just sit there and cry. And so, yeah, I don't know if that's really a time that I felt misunderstood, but
I think it is. So often our goal, so what was the goal there? Was the goal to make sure that every kid in the room drank a glass of milk?
Yes,
it probably,
I think so.
they didn't understand they were establishing that was a goal, but their behavior was showing that was a goal. What's your favorite way to encourage a child?
Ooh, definitely positive praise. Every student thrives off positive praise. Sometimes it'll be tangible objects, but a lot of the times it's just like, oh my gosh, you're doing such a great job sitting right now. Or I love how you treated your friend so kindly. Like, you would just see kids light up like stars when you give them positive praise.
Yes, we all like that.
Yes.
What is a book that you enjoy, that you would recommend to others?
Ooh. So my favorite book, I read it at least once a year. It's called A Severe Mercy by Sheldon Van Auken. Have you heard of it?
No, I'm writing it down.
Oh my goodness. I cry every time I read it. It's about, so Sheldon and his wife were friends of C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis actually brought them both to Christ through like becoming friends with them and writing letters with them. It's an amazing book. You have to read it.
Okay, I've written it down. As soon as we get
Okay.
off of here, I'm going to get it. Describe yourself in 3 words.
Ooh. I think that I am kind, patient, and driven.
Great combo. Who has had a big impact on your life?
Ooh. Oh my gosh, I did not think I was okay. Sorry, I did not think I was gonna cry at this answer. Um, I'm just gonna say my grandma.
Well, I'm
Sorry,
thankful
I
for.
don't know why.
Hey, Lexi, it's okay to cry, and it's okay to love your grandma and miss her and be emotional about talking about her. And I'm thankful
Thank you.
for the influence that she had on her life. And I hope she knows my grandma in heaven, because my grandma was pretty awesome. My grandma was pretty awesome too. Okay, Lexi, finish this thought. Every child.
Has a seat at the table.
I agree. It has been so great getting to know you better, Lexi.
Thank you.
And what you're doing on the adaptedway.com and on IG is really helping people, helping churches. I think also what you're doing is you are, for parents who have kids that have a hard time fitting in at church, you're making them, they feel known and seen by what you post. You have a lot of people who are watching you. Even though you're all about the church, they're not in the church. They're wanting to be in the
which is
church.
crazy. Yeah.
Oh, have you heard from families?
I've heard from quite a few families, yes.
And what have they said?
A lot of them are just really thankful. So it's actually crazy. I feel like I hear equally from churches and families. And what I hear from a lot of families is a lot of times they just ask me, like, how can I bring this up to my church? Or like, what do I do if I'm like if I'm facing indifference from the church or like resistance and like starting something like this. So like a lot of them are like parents who are just like trying to get things started themselves because the church isn't really getting the ball rolling for them.
So what do you tell them?
Oh gosh. So
How do they approach the church?
Yeah, so it's different. It's different for different families, but a lot of the times I'll just tell them, like, first of all, like talking face to face or over the phone is always best. Like messages can get mixed up, like through email or text. You're like, I don't know, like your tone just sounds different when you're passionate about something on email or text versus face to face. So I always, first of all, recommend like asking your pastor to meet for coffee, like face to face, or like asking for a phone call, and just sharing like, we really love going to this church. Like this is where like we feel like this feels like our church family. And then just like expressing like the difficulty that they might have with bringing their child to church, or like, yeah, just things like that. Because a lot of times, like if you approach it with hostility, I don't know. I'm like losing the words that I want to say right now, but just like trying to get your pastor to meet with you with like empathy and compassion rather than being like, I want this and I want to now my kid, you aren't able to accommodate them. So like now I'm upset. But like really, I don't know. I feel like that's not really a good answer, but that's what I tell.
No,
just having a conversation with your pastor.
That's a great answer. And your advice about approaching with hostility versus kindness and compassion and empathy. I know when somebody approaches me about something with hostility, I immediately go on the defensive. And typically it doesn't end well for any of us.
Yes.
So I appreciate the work you're doing. Continue.
Thank you.
Continue to do this work. My dream is that the church is a place where every child can belong and find their place and contribute. And to your point, have a place at the table. So Lexi,
Yes.
thank you. I look forward to many, many more conversations with you in the future.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for having me.